It was just business, until she realized whose game she was really playing. Clara Vance had never stepped foot in a place like Le Crest. The doors alone felt heavier than her rent. Polished oak, gold handles, and the kind of silence that made you question if your heels were too loud or if you were. She paused just inside, smoothing the fabric of her thrifted black dress, the one her roommate promised looked expensive enough under dim lighting. It wasn't dim. The chandeliers glittered like icicles, casting light over marble floors and crystal glassware. Every table was draped in white linen, every guest draped in generational wealth. Clara swallowed hard and approached the maitre d', rehearsing the text she'd received. 7 p.m. Le Crest. Ask for table 9. No name. Just that. She hated dating apps. But after months of saying no, she'd finally agreed to this one. A guy who claimed he was between jobs, charming in a humble sort of way. Coffee had been the plan. Maybe a casual bar. Not this. The maitre d' looked her over, hesitation flickering across his polished expression. Clara felt it like a spotlight. The way his eyes caught the scuff on her heel, the fraying strap of her purse. But then he smiled, thin and professional. Right this way, Mississippi. Mississippi. No last name. No confirmation. Just assumption. She followed, pulse thudding in her ears, weaving through conversations in French and Italian, past couples who didn't glance up because women like Clara didn't belong in their world. When they reached table 9, Clara's breath caught. Corner seat. Panoramic view of the city skyline. A table usually reserved for power deals or scandalous affairs, not blind dates with underemployed charmers. She sat down carefully, as if the chair might charge her by the second. A waiter appeared instantly, offering a wine list that felt heavier than her student loans. Clara waved it off with a polite smile, pretending she wasn't already calculating how much a glass would cost. Her phone buzzed. She snatched it up, but it wasn't him. Just a promotional email reminding her rent was due next week. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The glances started, subtle but sharp. A woman alone at that table drew attention, and Clara could feel the weight of every sideways look. She checked her phone again. Still nothing. Across the room, from behind the bar's glass partition, Julian Crestwood noticed. He always noticed. As the owner of Le Crest, Julian made it his business to read people. Investors, celebrities, enemies disguised as friends. But tonight, it wasn't the usual sharks that caught his eye. It was her. A woman seated at his most exclusive table, wearing confidence like a borrowed coat. Almost convincing, but not quite. She wasn't sipping wine. She wasn't scrolling like the bored wives of executives. She was waiting. For who? Julian's jaw tightened. No reservation matched her profile. No one sat at table 9 without his staff knowing exactly who they were and why they mattered. But she didn't seem like a con or a social climber. She looked stranded, but too proud to ask for a lifeboat. You should have sent someone else to handle it. A manager. Security. Instead, Julian straightened his cufflinks, set down his glass, and walked toward her, curiosity outweighing logic. Clara didn't see him coming. She was too busy rehearsing exit strategies in her head, wondering how to leave without looking like she'd been stood up. Waiting long. The voice was smooth, deep, controlled. She looked up, and her words caught her throat, because the man standing at her table wasn't the waiter she expected. He wasn't dressed like staff. He wasn't smiling like someone offering service. He was looking at her like a question he intended to answer himself. And Clara realized she wasn't just at the wrong table. She was in the middle of a night she couldn't afford, in every sense of the word. Clara Vance knew 2 things in that moment. First, the man standing at her table wasn't here to offer a menu. Second, she was wildly, hopelessly out of her depth. The stranger's presence was disarming in a way that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with control. His tailored suit wasn't flashy, but the fabric whispered custom. His dark hair was effortlessly styled, like he didn't need to impress anyone, because he'd already won. And those eyes, sharp, assessing the color of storm clouds over city skylines. Clara swallowed, straightening in her chair. I'm sorry, do I know you? A corner of his mouth curved, not a smile. More like amusement laced with something she couldn't quite place. "You're sitting at my table," he said smoothly. "It's a fair question." Clara's heart skipped. She glanced around, half expecting cameras or some cruel prank reveal. But no, the diners around her were too absorbed in their quiet luxury to care. "I was told table 9, she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm meeting someone." His gaze flicked to the empty seat across from her. "Are you?" She bristled, heat creeping up her neck. "Look, I don't know what this is, but if there's a problem, I'll just—" "Miss Vance." His voice lowered, her name rolling off his tongue like he'd owned it longer than she had. "There's no problem." Her breath caught again, sharper this time. "How do you know my name?" He finally pulled out the chair opposite her. Sitting down like this was his office, and she'd stumbled into a meeting she wasn't invited to. "Julian Crestwood," he said, extending a hand she didn't take. "I own Le Crest." Her stomach dropped. Crestwood, of course. She'd read the name before, in business articles she could never relate to. Tech investments, luxury holdings, the kind of man whose empire existed in headlines and hush money. "I believe," Julian continued, eyes never leaving hers, "you were expecting someone else." Claire's mind raced. This wasn't just a wrong table, it was a wrong life. One text message had thrown her into a world where people like her didn't survive without a bill they couldn't pay. "I'll leave," she said quickly, reaching for her purse. Embarrassment burned hotter than fear now. But Julian's hand moved, not to stop her, but to slide something across the table. Her phone. Clara froze. "How did you—" "I make it my business to know who sits at my tables, especially when they've been set up." Her blood ran cold. "Set up?" Julian leaned back, studying her like a puzzle he was already solving. "There's no reservation under your date's name. In fact, there's no record of anyone booking table 9 tonight, except," he paused, tapping the table lightly. "Me." Clara's throat tightened. "So what, you think I'm scamming you? Crashing fancy restaurants for fun?" For a flicker of a second, something like respect sparked in his eyes, at her defiance, or maybe her audacity to hold his gaze. "No," he said simply. "I think someone wanted you here. Alone, and very uncomfortable." The words hit harder than she expected, because deep down, Clara knew this wasn't just a bad date. This was deliberate. Her mind flashed to the dating app, the vague profile, the too good to be true charm. She'd ignore the red flags because hope was louder than caution when you were tired of being alone. Julian watched realization settle over her face. "I don't know who you are," she muttered, standing abruptly, "but I'm not staying here to be humiliated." She turned, heart pounding, but Julian's next words stopped her mid-step. "You're not leaving through the front." Claire spun back, eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." He stood too, calm as ever. "There's a photographer outside. 2, actually. Paparazzi don't camp outside Le Crest unless they've been tipped off." Her stomach twisted. No, this couldn't be happening. She wasn't famous. She wasn't anyone. But Julian's expression told her everything. Someone wanted a story. A headline. "Mystery woman dines alone at Crestwood's private table." A scandal where she'd be the punchline. "Why would anyone care about me?" she whispered, more to herself than him. Julian didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured subtly toward a side corridor. "Come with me." Clara hesitated, every instinct screaming not to follow strange men in expensive suits. But when she looked at the main entrance, saw the faint glint of camera lenses through the frosted glass, she realized she had no choice. She followed Julian through the maze of hallways, past kitchens humming with quiet efficiency, until they reached a discreet door that led to a private elevator. The doors closed behind them, sealing her fate. Silence stretched thick between them as the elevator began its descent. Finally, Clara crossed her arms, glaring at his reflection in the mirrored walls. "Why are you helping me?" Julian's gaze met hers in the glass, unreadable but not unkind. "Because, Miss Vance," his voice was low, intimate. "I don't like being used. And tonight, someone used both of us." The elevator chimed softly as they reached the underground garage. Clara's world had shifted in less than 30 minutes. from an awkward blind date to being escorted out of a billionaire's restaurant like a secret. And she had no idea this was only the beginning. Julian Crestwood didn't speak as they stepped into the parking garage. The echo of Clara's heels against concrete, the sound of tires screeching in the distance. It all felt like a movie she hadn't agreed to star in. A sleek black town car waited at the far end, engine purring, driver already at attention. Julian opened the back door himself. "Get in," he said. "Calm. Absolute." Clara hesitated. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Julian didn't flinch, then walk into a scandal. "Your choice." She stared at him. Everything about this man screamed precision. From the way he held the door open, like it wasn't a favor, but an inevitability, to the faint impatience in his posture, the kind that came from always being obeyed. But Clara Vance had spent years surviving people like him. Powerful, sharp, charming when it served them. And yet, something was different about Julian. He wasn't offering control. He was offering safety, just not wrapped in softness. She got in. The door shut with a muffled thud. The world outside vanished behind tinted glass. Julian slid in beside her, phone in hand, already typing. "I'm calling off the press. That gives us 30 minutes before they spin the next angle." Clara folded her arms. "What makes you think I want to be part of your angle?" Julian didn't look up. "Because if I'm right, this wasn't random. You were lured. I was baited. Someone set this up for a reason." She scoffed, leaning back. "You think I'm part of some billionaire conspiracy? I think you're in over your head. And whoever did this wants to make you the scandal. Not me." Clara turned away, trying to hide how her chest tightened. She thought of the dating app, the mysterious profile, the way her inbox had suddenly flooded with offers the second she lost her job at Sinclair Global. It hadn't felt right, but desperation doesn't wait for right. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again, quieter now. Julian finally looked up. "Because I don't like being manipulated," he said. "And I hate being lied to. So I'm going to find out who did this. And when I do, I'll return the favor." His tone wasn't threatening. It was promise wrapped in velvet steel. They pulled up to a gated building she didn't recognize. Modern glass, clean lines, ivy climbing the outer walls like something out of a design magazine. Julian stepped out first, then turned back toward her. "You're not going back to your apartment tonight." Clara blinked. "Excuse me? There's a tabloid parked outside your building. Same ones who were outside the restaurant. Someone's paying them to follow you." Her stomach dropped. "I have nothing to hide." Julian's expression didn't change. "But you have everything to lose. And right now, you're alone in this." He wasn't wrong. The only person who might believe her was her best friend Kendra, and she was on a meditation retreat without cell service until Monday. "So what?" she asked, voice thinner than she wanted it to be. "I'll just move into your billionaire panic room." Julian's jaw ticked just once. "No, just for tonight, until we understand what this is." She should have refused. Should have stormed off, called a rideshare, dared the cameras to follow. But when she stepped through the private elevator and saw the quiet luxury of his penthouse, all cool stone and soft shadows and silence that smelled like eucalyptus and money, she realized she hadn't felt this safe in years. Or this off balance. Julian offered her a guest room, a closet stocked with neutrals in her exact size, slippers still in the wrapper, a chilled bottle of wine already uncorked on the terrace. "You have cameras in my closet?" she asked, half joking. He just raised an eyebrow. "No, but I do have resources." Clara stared at him, the kind of man who didn't guess. Who knew? "Who are you really?" Julian paused. Something behind his eyes flickered. "I'm someone who hates coincidence," he said softly. "And right now, you're the biggest one in my life." The air still between them. And for the first time, Clara realized something far more dangerous than scandal was happening. She wasn't just involved in a story. She was the story. And Julian Crestwood wasn't just the man who saved her night. He might be the one who rewrote her whole life. Clara woke to the kind of silence that didn't exist in her world. Not the hum of a cheap fridge. Not the neighbor's late-night TV. Just stillness. Expensive, intentional stillness. For a split second, she forgot where she was. The Egyptian cotton sheets. The faint scent of cedar. The skyline view wrapping around floor-to-ceiling windows. And then it hit her. Julian Crestwood's penthouse. The scandal. The cameras. The deal she never agreed to but somehow couldn't walk away from. She sat up fast, heart racing, only to find a neatly folded note on the nightstand beside a steaming cup of coffee. Didn't want to wake you. Kitchen stocked. I'll be back in an hour. G. Clara stared at the letter J like it was mocking her. Casual. Familiar. As if this was normal. As if spending the night in a billionaire's guest room after being dragged into a tabloid nightmare was just. Tuesday. She padded barefoot into the main living space. Every inch of the penthouse whispering money doesn't shout when it knows it already owns the room. Marble counters. Minimalist art. A sleek laptop left open on the kitchen island. She wasn't nosy. At least, she told herself that. But when the screen lit up as she passed, and a document flickered into view, she couldn't help it. Because at the top of that document was her name, Clara Vance, incident report. Her stomach dropped. She knew she shouldn't read it. Knew this was the moment in every bad decision where the heroine makes it worse. But curiosity wasn't what made her drag the screen closer. It was fear, line after line detailed last night like it was a case file. The paparazzi were no accident. The dating app profile that lured her to the restaurant wasn't just fake. It was commissioned. But it was the next name that froze her blood. Commissioned by Gregory Slate. Clara's hands trembled. Gregory Slate, her ex-boss, the CEO who'd fired her 3 weeks ago after she caught wind of a financial cover-up at Sinclair Global. By noon, Clara wasn't back in her own clothes. She wasn't in her own life. She wasn't even sure she was in control anymore. Julian's driver, a man in a slate gray suit who looked more ex-military than chauffeur, arrived right on time, holding the door open for her like she was a senator instead of a woman who'd accidentally walked into a billionaire's PR disaster. Mr. Crestwood will meet you at the club, the man said. Club. She didn't ask which, because she knew the kind of places Julian went didn't need names. They were legacy, invitation only. Marble staircases and politics served with French rose. When she stepped out of the car 20 minutes later, Clara's secondhand blouse and borrowed flats felt like a joke, especially when she was escorted past members in $1,000 linen suits who barely noticed her, except for one older woman who raised an eyebrow in disapproval and returned to her poached salmon. Julian was already there, not at a corner table, not somewhere discreet, but front and center on the sunlit terrace, looking like every scandal he'd ever been accused of was water under a bridge he personally owned. He stood when she arrived, and for a moment, just one, she hated how effortlessly magnetic he was, how his sleeves were casually rolled to his forearms, how the light hit his watch just enough to blind you, how he didn't apologize for taking up space. Sit, he said, not as a command, but as a promise that whatever storm was coming, it would meet them head-on. Clara did. Menus were brought, glasses filled. Nobody asked what she wanted. I don't belong here, she said finally. Julian didn't blink. Neither do half the people around us. They just dress like they do. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. Clara looked away, but Julian leaned forward, lowering his voice. Slate's already spinning the press. He's blaming you for everything. Claims you stole data, leaked confidential assets, tried to bribe me into silence. Her blood ran cold. That's insane. I have nothing. You have me. Julian's words landed like a shot. She didn't know what to say. Gratitude caught in her throat like glass. I don't understand, she said, quieter. Why are you helping me? Julian tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on hers like he was weighing something. Trust, maybe, or risk. Because I've seen what men like Slate do when no one stands in their way. And because I need someone who understands what it's like to lose everything and still show up. Clara stared at him. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't pity. It was an offer, one she didn't know how to read. You think I'm strong? She asked. I know you are, Julian replied. You're still sitting here. And that means something. Clara swallowed hard. Because she didn't feel strong. She felt like the whole world had shifted beneath her. And the only thing steady was a man she wasn't supposed to know. Then Julian reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folder. Confidential. Embossed. He slid it across the table. Inside, a job offer. A real one. Chief Communications Consultant for Crestwood Holdings. 6 figures. Full autonomy. Nunda. And handwritten at the bottom in blue ink. Let's see what happens when you stop surviving and start owning the story. She looked up at him. Julian didn't smile. He just waited. And in that moment, Clara realized something. This wasn't about Slade anymore. It was about her. Her voice. Her narrative. Her war to win or walk away from. But accepting would mean stepping into a world that didn't forgive mistakes. Especially not ones made with emotion. Especially not ones that looked like trust or something deeper. Clara signed the offer before her coffee cooled. She told herself it was logic, survival, a smart pivot after Slate torched her reputation. But deep down, as she handed that folder back to Julian Crestwood, she knew this wasn't just a career move. It was stepping onto a chessboard where every piece was already in motion, and Julian was both the king and the man flipping the table when the game didn't suit him. By the next morning, Clara wasn't just unemployed. She was rebranded. Her inbox flooded with introductions. Legal teams, PR strategists, a personal assistant named Lyle who greeted her with, "Mr. Crestwood says you prefer espresso over drip. I'll make sure the office is stocked." Office. Clara hadn't even seen an office yet. By noon, she was escorted to the top floor of Crestwood Holdings, a penthouse suite disguised as a workspace, where glass walls overlooked the city like it was something Julian owned by default. When she stepped inside, Julian was waiting. Not behind a desk, but by the window, phone in one hand, a file in the other, dressed in a charcoal suit sharp enough to cut through whatever nerves she'd managed to suppress. He ended the call without looking rushed. Turned toward her like this was exactly when he expected her to arrive. "Welcome to the other side," he said. Clara crossed her arms, defensive by instinct. "I didn't realize I was switching sides." "You're not," Julian replied smoothly. "You're finally on yours." He gestured to the file in his hand and set it down on the sleek black table. Slate's already making moves. He scheduled an exclusive interview tonight. He's going to spin this as corporate betrayal. If he controls the narrative first, you're done. Clara's stomach twisted. So what? We sit here and hope people believe me instead of him. Julian's lips curved, not a smile. A strategy? No, he said. We don't hope. We control our story first. He pressed a button on the table console. A screen lit up, revealing a full media plan. Headlines ready to drop. Leaks prepared. A timeline that didn't just defend Clara, it exposed Slate. Emails, recordings, paper trails that would make even the most cynical journalist foam at the mouth. Clara stared at it all, realization dawning like a storm cloud. "You planned this," she whispered. "Before I even said yes." Julian finally smiled just a little. "I knew you'd say yes the moment you sat across from me and didn't flinch." Her pulse raced. This wasn't a partnership. It was a calculated war. And Julian Crestwood didn't fight fair. "Why me?" she asked, voice tight. "You could have hired anyone." Julian stepped closer, his presence unervingly steady. "Because anyone else would have taken the money and disappeared," he said. You've already lost everything, which means you're dangerous." Clara's breath caught. Dangerous. No one had ever called her that before. But before she could process it, Lyle appeared at the door. "Car's ready, sir. The interview is in 2 hours." Julian didn't break eye contact with Clara. "Time to decide," he said quietly. "Do you want to defend yourself?" He leaned in, just enough for her heart to trip over itself. "Or do you want to destroy him?" Clara swallowed hard, because deep down, the answer wasn't survival anymore. It was fire. "Let's burn it down," she said. Julian's grin was all approval and no mercy. "Good," he murmured, "because once this starts, there's no going back." As they walked out together, Clara felt it. That terrifying electric pull of power she never thought she'd taste. But she also felt something else. The weight of Julian's gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. And the quiet, impossible question that lingered between strategy and something far more dangerous. Who was playing who? Clara had done interviews before. Polite segments. Product launches. Industry panels where everything was curated down to the last breath. But this wasn't press. This was war. And she was walking into it in a white blazer that looked like peace, but felt like armor. Julian sat beside her in the back of the black car, legs crossed, hands still. His presence was unreadable. Not calm, not tense, just set, like a man who didn't gamble unless he already owned the table. Clara, on the other hand, could feel the storm in her chest. What if they didn't believe her? What if Slate had already spun the narrative? What if this wasn't a comeback, but a funeral? "You have 10 minutes when we get there," Julian said without looking at her. "Keep your points sharp. No apologies. No higging. You're not asking for forgiveness. You're taking back the mic." Clara stared out the window. "You make it sound easy." Julian finally glanced at her, and for the first time all day, something flickered behind his eyes. Not calculation, not confidence, but faith. "Not easy," he said. "I just believe you'll do it anyway." The car rolled to a stop. A crowd had already formed outside the studio. Cameras, lights, shouted questions, reporters elbowing for position. Lyle opened the door, and the noise hit like a tidal wave. Julian stepped out first, unbothered. Clara followed, and suddenly, silence. Not literal, but charged, because she wasn't just the woman fired from her own company anymore. She was the woman standing beside Julian Crestwood, and that meant power. The interview room was dark and theatrical. A single chair waited under the spotlight. Clara took it. The anchor, a seasoned veteran with a reputation for eating CEOs alive, welcomed her with a handshake and a raised brow. "You've had quite a week, Miss Bellamy." Clara smiled. "Just barely. So I've heard." Then the cameras rolled, and for the next 8 minutes, she tore through Slate's narrative like it was paper. She showed receipts, emails, timeline breakdowns, memos proving exactly who authorized the decisions that led to the meltdown and who tried to pin it on her when things went south. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't even flinch when the anchor asked, "Are you saying your ex-fiancé committed fraud?" Clara looked straight into the lens. "I'm saying he lied. I'm just the one who stopped protecting him." By the time the segment ended, Clara's name was trending in 12 countries. Julian met her in the wings. "You burned it down," he said quietly, eyes scanning her face. Clara exhaled. "Feels like it." He didn't reply, just reached for her hand and laced their fingers together like he'd done it before. She blinked, but before she could pull away or ask what it meant, he leaned in and whispered something no one else heard. "This is the part where we don't look back." Clara froze, because in that moment, with the world watching, she realized he wasn't just building her comeback. He was becoming part of it, and that was far more dangerous than any lie Slate had told. Clara wasn't sure when the lines blurred. Maybe it was the way Julian's hand didn't leave hers until they were back in the car. Maybe it was the way Lyle suddenly gave them space, like he knew something unspoken had shifted. Or maybe it was the quiet, not the silence of fear, but the rare, unsettling calm that comes when two people stop pretending they're only playing a game. The city lights blurred past the window as they drove through downtown. Clara could still feel the adrenaline humming under her skin from the interview, but it wasn't nerves anymore. It was something else. Power, freedom, and a dangerous awareness of the man sitting beside her. Julian hadn't said much since they left the studio. He didn't have to. His gaze spoke louder than any deal he'd ever made. Finally, when the car slowed outside her building, Clara reached for the door handle, but Julian's voice stopped her. "Come upstairs." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even an invitation. It was a statement of inevitability. Clara turned, one brow arched. Bold assumption. Julian's lips curved just slightly. "It's not about bold. It's about finishing what we started." She knew he meant the plan, the press, the final nail in Slate's coffin. But his eyes told a different story, and Clara didn't want to run from it anymore. The elevator ride was quiet but charged. Every glance, every breath, like the air between them was waiting to ignite. When they stepped into her penthouse, Clara kicked off her heels, suddenly feeling the weight of the day, of the years leading up to this moment. She walked to the window, the skyline glittering beneath her like a reminder of everything she'd fought for. Julian stayed by the door, watching her with that same unreadable intensity. "I should open a bottle of wine," she said, mostly to herself. But before she could move, she felt him behind her, close enough to feel the heat of his body, but not touching. You could, Julian murmured, his breath grazing her ear. Or you could admit what this really is. Clara's pulse spiked. She turned slowly, finding herself inches from him. And what's that? She asked, voice steady, even if her heart wasn't. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. Two people who stopped pretending the moment you took my hand. For a split second, Clara thought about stepping back, about keeping this clean, professional, survivable. But then Julian's hand came up, not forceful, just a gentle trace along her jaw, like he was giving her every chance to say no. She didn't. Instead, she closed the distance. The kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was weeks of tension snapping all at once. Fierce, hungry, inevitable. Julian's hands anchored at her waist, pulling her against him like he'd been waiting for permission he never truly needed. Clara's fingers tangled in his shirt, gripping like he might disappear if she let go. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said quietly. Clara swallowed hard, her head spinning. "Good," she whispered back, "because I'm done living in the past." But even as the words left her lips, a flicker of fear twisted in her chest. Because crossing this line with Julian Crestwood wasn't just risky. It was irreversible, and in the morning, the real fallout would begin. Clara woke to sunlight slicing through her curtains and a phone vibrating relentlessly on the nightstand. For one blissfully disoriented moment, she forgot everything. Forgot the years of clawing her way back from nothing. Forgot the lies, the stage dates, the cameras. Forgot Julian Crestwood asleep in her bed, one arm draped possessively across her waist like even in sleep, he wasn't letting go. But reality came crashing in the moment she saw her phone screen. 12 missed calls, dozens of texts, and a single news alert that made her stomach turn. Crestwood's heiress scandal, Clara Vance's secret deal exposed. Her blood ran cold. She sat up too fast, heart pounding as she scanned the article. Phrases like manufactured romance, PR manipulation, and insider deception jumped off the screen like bullets. Julian stirred behind her, his voice rough from sleep. "What's wrong?" Clara didn't answer right away. She was too busy scrolling, too busy seeing her private strategy, their carefully executed plan, laid bare for the world to devour. There were screenshots, anonymous sources, even a leaked copy of their original agreement. Someone had sold them out. She shoved the phone toward Julian. His jaw tightened as he read, the muscles in his shoulders going rigid. Lyle, he muttered, "It has to be." Clara's mind raced. Why? He was part of this. Julian swung his legs out of bed, already reaching for his clothes. Because loyalty ends where profit begins. Slate must have offered him more. Panic clawed at Clara's throat, but she forced it down. This wasn't the time to spiral. She was Clara Vance, the woman who survived worse than bad press. But then her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a reporter. It was Slate. A message. Just one line. "How does it feel to lose twice?" Her hands trembled. Julian saw it. He crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands, steady, grounding. "Look at me," he ordered, voice low but firm. "We're not done." Clara's eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. "The board will pull out. Investors will scatter. My name's already a punchline." Julian's gaze darkened, but not with defeat, with determination. Then we remind them who they're dealing with. Before Clara could respond, Julian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then answered sharply. "Tell me you have it," he snapped. A pause, then a slow, grim smile curved his lips. "Send it to every outlet, every shareholder, and make sure Slate sees it first." He hung up and looked at Clara, really looked at her, like he was seeing not the woman crumbling under public scrutiny, but the fighter who'd walked into his restaurant without knowing she was about to rewrite both their lives. "I hope you're ready," Julian said, his voice a dangerous promise. "For what?" Clara managed, her heart still racing. His smile was all teeth. To burn his empire down this time. Clara felt the fear, but beneath it, something hotter, sharper. Hope. Because if she was going to go down, it wouldn't be quietly. and definitely not alone. As Julian extended his hand, Clara took it without hesitation. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. But deep down she knew this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. And maybe, just maybe, the chance to build something real from the ashes. By noon, the headlines had shifted. What started as Clara Vance's public humiliation was now something else entirely. Something sharper, deadlier. Clara stood in the center of Julian's penthouse office, sleek glass walls framing the skyline, as news anchors scrambled to rewrite the narrative they thought they owned. Across every screen, one name replaced hers. Exposed. Harrison Slate's offshore empire and corporate blackmail scandal. Her pulse roared in her ears as she watched Slate's smug face plastered beside words like fraud, embezzlement, and federal investigation underway. It was done. Julian's contact, a quiet, ruthless investigator with no loyalty but to leverage, had delivered everything Slate thought was buried. And now, the world was feasting on it. Julian leaned against the desk, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Clara could still feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but beneath it, there was disbelief. "We really did it," she whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud. Julian's gaze finally met hers, and for the first time in days, there was a flicker of something softer. Not triumph, not the cold satisfaction of revenge, but relief. "You did it," he corrected quietly. "I just lit the match." Clara let out a breathless laugh, the kind that felt too close to tears. She walked toward the window, staring down at the city that once looked so impossible to conquer. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't threats. It was messages from investors, from board members, from people who'd already begun to distance themselves from Slate's sinking ship and realign with her. An offer from Crestwood Holdings to back her new venture. Her name, not tied to scandal, but to survival, to brilliance. She turned back to Julian, who was watching her like he wasn't sure if she was about to run or stay. There was silence between them, but not the kind that hurt anymore. It was the kind that asked a question neither had voiced yet. What now? They weren't pretending anymore. There were no cameras, no contracts, no staged kisses or strategic headlines. Just two people who had clawed their way through betrayal, power plays, and a lie that turned into something dangerously real. Julian straightened, walking toward her with that same quiet intensity that unnerved her from the start. "When I first made that offer," he said slowly, "I thought I was buying time, a way to control the damage." Clara's throat tightened. "And now?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see every line of exhaustion, every shadow of restraint behind his eyes. "Now I'm wondering if I can convince you to stay," he said. "Without any deals, without any lies." Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. Because this wasn't part of the game. This was real. But before she could answer, Julian gave a faint, knowing smile, the kind that said he wasn't expecting an answer. "Not yet. I'm not asking today," he added softly. "You've earned the right to decide what comes next." He reached into his pocket, and for one terrifying second, she thought he was pulling out a ring. But it was just a flash drive, the same one that saved them both. He pressed it into her hand. "Whatever you build from here," he said, "make sure it's yours." Clara stared at it, so small, but heavier than anything she'd ever held. When she looked up, Julian had already stepped back, giving her space. For the first time in years, Clara Vance didn't feel trapped. She felt free. A slow smile curved her lips, not the polished, PR-perfect smile she used to wear, but something real, something fierce. "I will," she promised. As she walked toward the elevator, she didn't look back. Not because she was leaving him behind, but because she knew if Julian Crestwood was serious, he'd find her when the time was right. Outside, the city didn't care that a woman had just burned down an empire and found herself in the ashes. But Clara cared, because this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And this time, no one was writing her story but her.